Welcome back to Sermon Rewind. I'm Todd, and that's Jordan.
What up, Todd?
Okay.
Yeah, that was fair.
Yeah. Ready to go?
Always.
Okay, let's jump in. We're still in Titus, live and lead. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. Your big idea. You ever gonna have a small idea?
Never.
No, always big ideas. The faith of the church and its public conduct are inseparably connected.
Can't have one without the other.
Your works and your faith should match.
Yeah.
Okay. Point number 1, instructions for older men and women. That'd be you and me.
Anything over 40, I'm in there.
Anything over 40, right? And then point number 2, instructions for younger men and women, or women and men. I believe you alternated women and men.
He did, so I did.
Yeah. Anyway, not going to go too deeply into a number of things, though. You did talk about the fact that retired people have no excuse not to spend time with younger people. Any tips on how they should approach that, by the way, since they don't speak TikTok and there might be a little bit of a culture gap in addition to an age gap?
I'm actually glad you asked that because I think that's a bit of a farce. I don't think that you have to completely understand the cultural nuances between generations in order to relate to them, especially because there's just some universal things that are passed down from one to the next, right? If we choose to get married, that's specifically something that someone older than us who did get married will have already experienced as well. So there's just some things that I think we do have in common that we can address, we can unravel with one another, and we can build upon. But no, I think it's a sad excuse, though it may really be there, that you have to understand what they're thinking, why they're thinking it in order to connect with them.
All fair. Though, again, and I'm not making excuses for people, but it is okay to acknowledge that older people tend to hang out with older people and younger people the same, right? Intergenerational dialogue is not always natural.
Right.
We tend to homogenize who we hang out with.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple questions that were submitted, and they're sort of in the ballpark of what we were talking about a little bit. So I'll jump right in. One of them, why didn't you talk about what it means for a wife to submit to her own husband? Isn't that important for our wives to know? And you did talk a little bit about some differentiation between instructions for men and women. And
sure,
you have to always walk a very interesting line given the different perspectives there are out there on men and women.
Yeah.
So you didn't talk a lot about submission.
Right. And I think just because in order to deal with it well, you'd have to just go way off topic, I think. But all that being said, I also find it kind of funny that it's clearly that question was written by a husband about whether or not he thinks his wife should know that. That's interesting to me. That being said,
are you just making a judgment based on penmanship, or you just know who wrote it?
No, I have no idea who wrote it, but they said that, and I quote, "Isn't that something that our wives should know?"
Maybe.
Yeah. So we'll assume.
Maybe they veiled it grammatically in order to sort of hide who wrote it.
Yeah. Either way, no matter how you go about it, sure, I do think that a biblical understanding of submission is important. Like I said, it would take a lot of time, I think, because there's so much cultural baggage wrapped up in that. I also don't think it's the most pressing thing in there. Looking for opportunities and ways to get our ladies or men in our life to understand how they ought to act in our marriages so that we feel good about it is not the same as having Christians of various degrees of ages walking faithfully in such a way that makes a big deal of Jesus. I'm not saying that two are necessarily different from one another all the time, but again, the thrust isn't, man, I want to figure out how to get my wife to do what I really want my wife to do. Therefore, I really wish Pastor Jordan would have said something. I didn't talk about submission because I just don't think it's the best way to deal with something like that from the pulpit all the time. But if you're going to, there are better texts for it. That would be my only reason for not going there.
So is it perhaps fair to say we should focus our energy on being the types of people that others want to follow?
Yeah.
Whether it be spouses or not.
Right.
As opposed to clarifying our leadership hierarchy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe this is a bad analogy. You can tell me this is a bad analogy, but the best bosses I've ever worked for, and it's not that, again, spouses are bosses and employees, but people that I've worked for, the best ones I've ever worked for are people that didn't have to tell me that they were the boss.
Yeah.
I wanted to work for them because I admired them. I admired their work. Their title was irrelevant.
Yeah.
And it was just easier to do than somebody who constantly told me, well, you remember that I'm the boss.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I think that's a great analogy. Anytime someone has to lord authority over someone, they've already lost it.
Okay. Second question, and this relates to this in a more broad way because you gave instructions for, and Titus sort of talks about the behaviors of men and women. Why is Pastor Jordan, that's you, so focused on works? Seems like we're always talking about what we need to be doing and not what Jesus has done.
Okay.
First of all, do you feel like you talk a lot about works?
I do think that I talk a lot about the behavior of the church, yes.
Okay. Is works the same as the behavior of the church? Is Titus giving us works?
Not necessarily. Titus is just talking about how you ought to behave if you profess a certain thing. So if you say you're an American, there's probably some expectations that you act in accord, whatever that looks like. But to be a Christian, to profess Christ as Lord, there is, all throughout the New Testament, some expectations about how you carry yourself in the public. Otherwise, Paul should be, or is pretty clear about the fact that you are not what you say you are. The two have to be synonymous. So I wouldn't call it works because works is normally attributed to someone saying that this is what you have to do in order to be a Christian, not what you should do if you are in fact a Christian. Those are two very different things. One works, earns something. Behavior is the result of something. If you are a Christian, it should result in fruit bearing in a particular way in your behavior in the public. So they're two very different things, and I think that's important for someone to know. But I am not slack in my conversations about Christian behavior because, frankly, I think there are too many Christians who live up on this mountaintop of, I believe these things because I say I do, but the way I live is the way I live. And we have terrible behavior in the church and outside of the church. We have Christians doing all kinds of nasty, gnarly, ungodly things and continuously saying, well, I believe this, therefore I'm a believer.
So why do you think that this is the conclusion that they've drawn? I mean, and again, we're speculating on how people are processing things,
sure,
right? But to be fair, you do talk about behaviors that Christians should embody on a regular basis. That could be perceived as talking about works. Are you okay with that? Do you feel like they're sort of saying, well, why don't you just talk about Jesus more? Just talk about the greatness of Jesus. Not that you don't, right?
Yeah.
Does it have to be one or the other? And why is there a dichotomy, do you think, sometimes for some people?
Okay, so
I know there's a lot of questions
do this
there.
With your permission.
Yeah.
I know it's a short show, so I'm going to keep this short.
Yeah.
But I want to paint a quick picture.
Okay, very quick.
Here's what I think the American Christian church often looks like. Imagine a grotesquely obese infant child sitting in a dirty diaper on the floor with a giant can of Similac, and they're just fisting this powder into their mouth, all in the name of getting fed. All the while not getting up, not moving, not crawling, not doing anything else that they're ultimately created to do. That's very much the Christian behavior, is that we want to be fed, we want more sermons, we want more services, want more this, want more that, but we have no real desire to get up on our 2 feet, to move, and to act in accord with our faith. And so I have a knack for speaking about behavior because I see such a deficit in Christian behavior in the church. And this isn't just our own church, though I would say it's here too, but this is the church at large, all over. And so we have to stop allowing the narrative, well, why don't we just talk more about Jesus? You know so much about Jesus already. You've been given such access to Jesus in comparison to the rest of the world. It's just not even funny. We have a responsibility to prophetically call our people to get up, to go and be all the things that they say they are. Otherwise, we're just helping fat babies get fatter.
Okay. Fat babies.
Fat babies.
There you go. One other question, and we actually got a question from a younger listener who was asking about the role that they play. Now, again, you talked about older men and women, and then younger women and men, right? But there are a number of sort of subcategories in between.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's not like you get to, okay, I'm an old person status and I'm only now mentoring younger people. That's my only role. Or I'm young and I'm only being mentored by older people.
Yeah.
There's different things in between. How does a person that, we'll say getting into their teen years, where they start to become more aware of their faith. It's more about what they actually believe. They've thought about it. They've embraced it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
What role do they play when they're kind of in the middle in some ways? There's still people above them that are older than them, wiser than that sort of thing. But now they have perhaps a role without talking down to them, in other words.
Yeah.
Right?
Well said.
How do they balance that?
Yeah. No, I think they to whoever wrote that question, it's a great question. And I think you should see it as, to some others, you are the older sister in the faith, right? You don't have to be 20, 30, 40, 50. That just means that you have somebody younger than you, right? Meaning you've lived a little bit longer, experienced a little bit more. So the reality is you should look at those younger than you and say, I have a responsibility lovingly in Christ to encourage similar behaviors that the Lord has called us to. That's my duty and my job. We get passed a baton and we pass the baton on to someone else. So like practically speaking, how do you do that in a way, that's not domineering or harsh? Primarily, you always have to make sure that you're only speaking or only encouraging out of love. You want them to thrive. You want them to flourish. You want them to follow Jesus more faithfully. If that's always kind of at the forefront of everything you're doing, I'd worry a little bit less about how it might be perceived all the time. Just make sure that they know you love them in everything that you do. I think you'll go a long way with it.
Sure. Well, and I think it's interesting that we use the word mature. I've never been totally comfortable with the word mature paired with Christian.
Yeah.
Like to say this person is a mature Christian. That suggests that they have somehow arrived.
Right.
And I think that's hard because on the one hand, and I've actually talked about this in a previous sermon, that when you get to what we call adulting, we sort of feel this pressure to have a lot of answers, to kind of be in control, to feel confident in what we're doing. In truth, we're making it up as we go along well into our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And then, again, we talked about the deficit when you get older. All of a sudden the world changes.
Of course.
And you feel completely clueless about what the younger people are doing.
Right.
So I think that's an interesting piece of this is that sometimes when people get into a mentoring role, they have mentored other people. They may have some knowledge, some experience, some wisdom. It can be easy for us to convince ourselves, well, I am now the person, I'm at the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
I have arrived, I have achieved this. I don't have a ton more to learn, and now I will just dispense what I have.
Yeah.
We have to be careful with that because we always have to be humble and be childlike well into our old age. And as you said, older people are still desperately needed.
Yeah.
So
100%.
Okay. And that's a good place to end.
I think so.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Sermon Rewind. If you're around Sunday mornings, we'd love to see you. If you're on Wednesday nights, we'd love to see you. And coming up this summer, we are going to have Summer Spectacular again. So stay tuned. Thanks again for joining us on Sermon Rewind.
See you soon.